Florida, my friends, and if you're like me, you are praying for this madness to end so we can go back to gaming and working and, I don't know, living our lives as normal. I've been keeping myself busy since I'm currently on lockdown, though I'm still working half a day because, hey, I'm essential. Of course, I'm getting paid a full week to work half a week, so I can't complain too loudly. Of course, I'm only working on emergency cases, and I never see another living person during the course of the day on average. But as I am essentially getting paid to sit around and wait for somebody to have an emergency, I started to think, how can we make D&D better? I've played every edition, and every edition had something wonky that kind of drug it down a bit. But every edition also got something right more than the others. Yes, even fourth. So I got to thinking, what about making a Frankenstein system, where we take the best parts of each edition and weld them together? Look at each individual aspect of D&D, figure out which edition got it right, and make those the rules. Well, that's what I'm going to talk about in this video. I'm Mr. Welch, and let's make Frankenstein's monster. I'm addressing the aspects of the game in no particular order, and first up we're going to look at the stats. For simplicity's sake, if a rule transcends across multiple editions, I'm only going to use the first edition that it appeared in. The easiest decision in this video was we're going to use the same 6 stats that were introduced in OD&D. We're not going to have comeliness like they introduced in Unearthed Arcana. We're not going to break the stats down and make it more complicated like they did in Skills and Powers. Just strength, dexterity, wisdom, constitution, intelligence, and charisma. There you go. Now we're going to have to redefine some of the stats because the actual definition of them have gotten a little wonky in 5th edition and also partially 4th. Going back to the original definition of charisma, where it is about how likable you are, none of the strength of personality, because that overlaps with willpower and wisdom way too much in the new edition. Next thing you have to address is trying to tie each stat into multiple mechanics to avoid dump stats, which is a major flaw for 5th edition and the intelligence stat. Unless you're a wizard or for some reason have a lot of intelligence skills, you're never going to use it in most adventures. Change up certain mechanics to spread out the uses, and then you get closer to balance. Take the current rules for dexterity versus the current rules for strength, for example. Aside from two-handed weapon damage, dexterity trumps strength in almost every category, unless you have a DM that really likes to calculate encumbrance. But then when you look at dexterity, you have a much more useful saving throw in sheer terms of the number of times you're going to have to make those saving throws. You have many more skills than strength's just one skill. It directly affects initiative. It adds to your armor class. If I remember correctly, when somebody broke down all the uses for all the skills, dexterity had 5 primary uses to strength 2. There's a few things you can do to rebalance the stats. Go back to 2nd edition with its fighting styles and the proficiency system that it used there. Finesse weapons become a fighting style, so you don't automatically get the attack and the damage bonus for fighting with a rapier like you do in 5th edition. You actually have to practice that fighting school to get all of the abilities that you start off with at 5th edition. Increase the number of strength skills, and that helps balance that out. That gives you a much fairer representation of the two stats, at least as they're used in combat. Increase the number of intelligence uses by having anything that regards a tool become an intelligence skill. You have trained in using all of these tools, but knowing which tool for which job is an intelligence check. When determining stat bonuses, keep with the system introduced in 3rd edition, where every 2 points gave you an additional +1. It was far superior than the 1st and 2nd edition charts because it did simplify the game. It also introduced us to the Holy Church of the Almighty +1, where everyone had to find just one more bonus to their roll, but that's going to be a problem in any incremental bonus system. Classes, we're going back to 1st edition with a strong touch of 2nd edition. 5th edition added quite a few classes, but most of them are just variants of previous classes, and they tend to be one-trick ponies that could easily be folded back into the original class. The trick is to make the number of classes few, but you make their scope broad. Barbarians are fighters again, but by leveling up your fighter, you gain the options so that you can mimic a barbarian if that's what you want to do. If you want to play a light-armored smash-mouth fighter, then that's an option for you. Sorcerers go back to being wizards. Warlocks are part of clerics again. You can still play those types, you just have to play the classes and take the options given to you to recraft that class into what you want to play. Sorcerers just become wizards that have a locked number of spells but get to use them more often. Nothing else really changes. Warlocks get their abilities from extra-dimensional creatures other than gods, while clerics get their powers obviously from gods. Bards return to their 2nd edition roots of being fighters and rogues, and wizards mixed in where you get a little bit of everything, but not enough to actually compete in any category with somebody of that class. It turns your magic back into intelligence-based skills because it keeps with the theme of arcane versus divine, rather than learning spells randomly during clarinet practice. Rangers become the skill monkey fighters. They lose the ability to use heavy armor. They can learn magic if that's how they want to progress their character. But we're still keeping with the 2nd edition fighting style, where you have to level up the fighting styles with proficiencies. That leaves every fighting style open to every fighting class. If you want a dual-wielding paladin, do it. This also can apply to weapon proficiencies and non-fighting classes. If a wizard wants to learn how to use a greatsword, they can put a proficiency point into greatsword. They'll never be able to advance it past anything other than hit people with no bonuses, but it's an option. More importantly, with the proficiency tree of the fighting types, the fighters get to advance more than anyone else, including the monks, the rangers, and the paladins. So the fighters can get really good at fighting with that sword, more than a paladin could ever dream of. When it comes time to level up, steal equally from the feats of 3rd edition and the options of skills and powers. So when you level up, you have multiple paths for your character, like some of the ranger subclasses have in 5th edition, where if you want to build your character in a certain style, you do it by picking those options. If you and your buddy are both playing fighters and you decide to go with the light armored cavalry guy with the bow and you want to basically be Genghis Khan, and your buddy wants to go heavy tank sword and board Sir Lancelot, those are very possible given the options. Yes, this leads to crippling over specializations for some people, but that's between you and the Dungeon Master. When it comes to saving throws, those are easy enough. 3rd edition got them perfect. Fortitude, reflex, and will. That's all you ever needed. The 1st edition saves were pretty much dodge, suck it up, and just say no, only with more steps. 5th edition decided to make each stat a saving throw, and you end up with over 200 things in the book that require a wisdom save, and only 10 that required an intelligence save. So just keep the 3rd edition setting, and everything's good. Now, the most popular part of Dungeons & Dragons for a large number of players is stabbing things. So combat needs a lot of work. 5th edition has bounded accuracy, which creates a lot of issues because things like capped armor class not scaling with the attack rolls can become a major issue in games. Simply put, if a player gets his hands on plate mail early, then most of the monsters are going to have a hard time hitting because the attack bonus early has a hard time reaching armor class 20 and above. At higher levels, the attack bonus becomes so high that no matter what your armor class is, you're going to constantly get hit. Compare that to 3rd edition, where fighting types constantly march their attack bonus up until the point where they had to try to miss to actually fail. The answer to the problem is somewhere in between. The capped numbers is the problem. You don't want attack bonuses scaling ever upward, but at the same time, if the number set by the bounded accuracy is too low, then the players are going to plateau. It's preferable that the highest armor class or the highest attack bonuses that monsters can achieve or the big bads can achieve are something that the players can't achieve. In short, there's always going to be something to challenge the players. One easy way to handle this is to alter the proficiency bonus if you're going to go the proficiency bonus route. So you've got a basic bonus and a focused bonus. Stealing from 1st edition's Thaco and somewhat repeated with 3rd edition's basic attack bonus, classes didn't level up their combat abilities at the same time. Classes, as far as combat goes, are considered now skilled, trained, or untrained. A fighter type that's considered skilled gets the full proficiency bonus to hit. Someone who's trained in combat, like a rogue or a cleric, doesn't get the full proficiency bonus, but they still get a bonus to hit, while somebody that's untrained, like a wizard, gets no bonus at all. Speaking of attacking with things, for weapons, head over to the Master System from BECME, or at least the Proficiency System for 1st edition. Your attacks are no longer tied to your level. You have to put points in your weapon proficiency to gain extra attacks, extra damage. It's just not automatic anymore. So instead of everyone hitting 7th level and the fighting types getting an additional attack, now the fighting types have to actually practice with a particular weapon to get the extra attack with that weapon. Characters have to learn their weapons. You don't automatically learn every weapon at 1st level if you're a fighter. You instead have to learn how not to embarrass yourself with a sword, and then getting good at it comes later. This gives a lot more character choice, but it also lets your character grow in skill. At 1st level, your Guybrush Threep would, but put 5 skill points into your longsword and then your Sanjuro from Yojimbo. If nothing else, it means fighting types get more customization, and it gets us away from the boring generic fighters. Speaking of weapons, the choice of the weapon needs to be made important again, so merge 2 aspects of weapons from 3rd and 5th edition to make more unique weapons. Take the critical range and the multipliers from 3rd edition, where a longsword had an easier time getting a crit, but a battle axe did more damage on a crit. Then throw in the weapon properties from 5th edition to add even more varieties, and throw in more properties to each weapon. Now, a battle axe and a longsword aren't exactly the same weapon on paper, just like the halberd or the glaive or the trident and the spear are all identical to each other. Bring back damage types to the forefront rather than 5th edition's vestigial rules like we have now. If you're going to make something a rule, have the rule count for something. Magic is a tricky one because it's about balance. We still want to keep the fancy in Magic because that's what D&D is. Just like selecting your weapons loadout in countless other RPGs, picking your spells is part of Magic. The issue is balancing the number of spells. If you do too few spells, you're going to end up like 1st edition, where you're just one spell and then you're off to go sleep for 8 hours. Too many spells, and wizards never really need equipment because they'll just use the magic constantly. So between 1st edition's single spell hell and 5th edition's cantrip cacophony, you use 3rd edition. Restrict the cantrips to so many uses per day, say a number equal to your intelligence bonus, and keep the Vancian system because it does work. Just find the balance between too few spells and too many spells. Moving on to alignment. Alignment is something that when you explain it right, it makes perfect sense. That being said, 5th edition has done a terrible job of explaining alignment. Alignment has 2 primary purposes. First, for dungeon masters, it's a godsend because it's a 2-letter cheat code for determining how monsters react. A chaotic evil monster is far more likely to break and run when the encounter goes badly, leaving his friends behind, than a lawful evil monster. The second part of alignment was captured beautifully by the Planescape setting, is that alignment can have an effect on the cosmology. Blame the Elric saga for alignment and how it focuses on law and chaos. But if you're going to steal from the best. Explain to your players that alignment is about status quo and morality. Law means stability and predictability. If you're going to go Freudian terms, it's the ego. It's about what's best for society. Chaos is the id. It's what's best for me. Good and evil are the classical definitions. Bringing back alignment as it was in 2nd edition means we can get back to warding off evil creatures rather than just clumping all outsiders into good and evil and ignoring whether they're actually good or evil. Plus, you get to bring back 3rd edition's fantastic alignment-based magic items, which is something that's sorely missing from the later editions. Now, if there's one thing 4th edition did better than the others, it's mooks. This was partially the case in 1st edition when monsters didn't have a lot of hit points. You'd face orcs and keep in the Borderlands and they'd have 3 hit points, 5 hit points, 4 hit points. Guys you could just stab and they would fall down. One-shotting mooks gives your players a sense of power. They want to be like Inigo Montoya in Princess Bride, where he cuts through Count Rugen's guards like a weed whacker with a personal beef. Once he cuts through the mooks to get to the big bad, then the actual fight starts. Mooks serve a purpose. They divert resources. They aren't going to be much of a threat to the party, but they do require attention. So sort non-boss monsters into 3 categories. Mooks, henchmen, lieutenants. Mooks automatically have minimum hit points. Henchmen have the average suggested hit points like 5th edition, and then underbosses have the maximum amount of hit points for their hit dice. It's the same monster, but this requires more or less attention depending on what role they serve in the combat. You do want to avoid hit point bloat. First off, it gets tedious, especially if the party isn't scaling up in damage to match the massive amounts of hit points the monsters get. If you're making the monsters tougher simply by making the characters hack at them for more rounds, that just makes it boring. 1st, 2nd, and Beckme scaled down the player character's hit points as well as the monsters. It kept the encounter shorter because there were less dead rounds where people just hacked at each other. If you need the monsters to survive longer, add more mooks. Scale the encounter distance so the players have to close, or have the monsters use tactics to attack from different angles. Make the monsters smarter, not thicker. Encounters are one of the hardest things to balance because we attach too much focus on monster challenge rating, which 5th edition doesn't do well. Early editions gave XP for gold earned, which has fallen out of favor. Instead of either way, change it to encounter XP. Anytime the party actively deals with an encounter, be it a monster, a trap, a puzzle, whatever, that's when they get the XP. By actively deal with it, I mean their actions defeat the monsters, disarm the traps, solve the puzzles, or deals with the problem before them. Doesn't matter how they deal with the encounter, as long as they deal with it. Kill the monsters, sneak past the monsters, bribe the monsters. All those handle the encounter. The party is dealing with the situation, and all their solutions have a chance of failure. For traps, you can disarm the trap, you can avoid the trap once you've noticed it, or you can activate the trap from a vantage point where it can't actually hurt you. All of those would be considered dealing with the trap actively. Award XP based on the deadliness of the encounter as well as the importance of the encounter. Successfully convincing the king to raise the army against the orc threat is a very important encounter, even if their lives weren't immediately at risk. Lastly, we have to deal with skills. Skill systems in D&D have been all over the place. 3rd edition gave us the ever-increasing skill points and the hated cross-class skills, while 5th edition gave us set skill proficiencies but made it almost impossible to learn new skills. After character creation in 5th edition, most players don't get a new skill, so scrap both of those and head over to the Rules Cyclopedia. Skill points are gone. Stat adjustments are gone. When you gain proficiency in a skill, your level of aptitude is equal to the related stat. If you have a strength of 10 and you take lifting, your lifting skill starts at 10. If you have an 18, the lifting skill starts at 18. Roll a d20, add your stat, and try to hit the target number. This might sound a bit off, but if you figure the rules for skill systems is an average person fails an average task half of the time, that strength 10 skill is trying to hit an average DC 20, and that's going to fail half the time. This is just flipping the Rules Cyclopedia skill system so you're trying to roll high instead of low, but the percentage doesn't change a single point. Every so many levels you gain new skill points and plus your intelligence bonus to give you more skill points. You can use these skills to upgrade your weapon proficiencies, add new skills, or add points to existing skills. This makes average tasks quite easy for high stat characters, but that's intentional. Lou Ferrigno isn't going to fail many attempts opening a pickle jar, while Keith Richards hasn't blown a lot of drinking skill checks in his life either. But the higher skill characters aren't going to settle for average, and they will try higher difficulties because the tougher checks for them are more manageable. Then you want to steal the weapon proficiency system from 2nd edition, especially with the fighting styles. So rather than just taking a dual weapon fighting style, and there you go, you get to use your bonus action for an extra attack, you can put additional proficiency points in your fighting styles to gain even further bonuses. So for dual weapon fighting, 1 level of dual weapon fighting lets you attack with your offhand weapon once. If you have 3 points of proficiency, then you can apply a number of attacks that you would normally get for having proficiency in your offhand weapon. This increases character customization, and the more points you put into your proficiency, the better you get with that different fighting style. Of course, you'll still get starting skills from your classes, so the thieves will get all of the thief skills. Rangers will get the variety of outdoor skills that they're known for. But when the players are getting their extra skills, don't put any restrictions on those at all. If a ranger wants to start buying arcane lore, persuasion, and dancing, let him. The character's background will fill out the rest. Don't tell players skills are off the table because you don't think their character should know how to do that. Do not fall into the 3rd edition cross-class skill trap. If you follow this method, you can always keep the 5th edition background rule, giving players a couple of automatic skills, but with the increased skill selection that you're getting from the Rules Cyclopedia, that's really not that necessary. So there you have it. That's my Frankenstein D&D. 2nd edition's classes, the skill system from the Rules Cyclopedia, weapon proficiencies from the Master Set in 2nd edition, mooks from 4th edition, saving throws from 3rd edition, weapon proficiencies being shared from 3rd and 5th edition. It complicates the rules of 5th edition, but it simplifies the rules from 3rd. It gives players more utility and more options. It lets the players decide what their characters should look like instead of the book. So remember, when it's time for 6th edition D&D, give me a call. I will be ready.